Okay, greetings, brothers and sisters. I'm kind of way ahead of time. I have two videos that are now uploaded that are one's going to be put out on Thursday, one's going to be put out on Friday, and this one, maybe Saturday or Sunday, so depending on how it all goes. And I have a few bot comments to read, but first I want to address this video clip I showed in my last video, which is entitled, let me find it here, Mel Gibson, Born Sinner. So people said that that movie was really messed up, and it is. And I'm going to show you one little short clip of it, and so much of it is about torturing Jesus. Mel Gibson, Born Sinner, more YouTube bot, price gouging rent in L.A., more Hegseth and Pasa Commentatus. Now I want to talk about the price gouging in L.A. So there's a realtor who said that she had some people she was trying to get into a house, and they were willing to pay market price of $30,000 a month, which is, it's hard to even think about. Imagine paying $30,000 per month per rent. I mean, how much are you making? Like, what's your situation? Where you're paying that much rent, and somebody else came in and took it, outbid them for $52,000 or $54,000 a month, something like that, something crazy, right? And at first, I was thinking how greedy the people were because she was presenting it, the woman was. But then I thought about it, and the reality of the thing is, you take the highest price. Because with real estate or anything else, there are times you can't rent. Or those people, let's say they had multiple properties and one of them burned to the ground, right? I mean, people are moving out of LA in droves. Those properties could be worthless. And, a year from now, you never know what's going to happen. Like anything else, it's an investment. And, if people create a bidding war, I mean, they listed it for $30,000 a month, and it might have been high, but it didn't matter. Someone came in and paid 50, over 50, which is crazy. Like for most of us, it's unthinkable, but that's the market, right? And why would they take the least? We're not going to take that. We don't want to be greedy. We're not going to take the extra $20,000 a month, right? Because that's not how people work. I mean, there's, this supply and demand, and right now there's a demand for houses, and those people who have properties, there's a bidding war because people need a place to live, and there's not enough of them. And you're in a good situation, but you might be in a horrible situation, or that house could burn down, or your properties could burn down. Like it's just like whatever it is, right? That's how our economy works. And yeah, people are greedy, but that's the nature of our economy is greed is good, right? I mean, you can't blame people for taking more money if people are willing to pay it. It just doesn't make any sense to do that. It goes against the economic principles that you would take less. Oh, don't pay that much, right? Only pay me half. You take as much as you can get because that's how, people want to make money. And so, like I said, I got this Passion of Christ thing coming up. I couldn't believe how gross that movie is and how twisted Mel Gibson is for making it. But there are a couple of comments here. The AI bot comments have slowed down. But one of them was really weird. So let me scroll through here. I have a whole thing I'm going to do with the bots. I have a kind of a prepared statement. I'm going to have to do voice to text. And then, because here it is. Grateful for your work. You can always support the work here. I am so grateful for all of the support. Kind of something that I kind of might say the last one, but not exactly. But I mean that was a easy one to reply to. Mostly they have yes and things like this. Good morning, Paul. I'm grateful for you. I watch your videos each couple times at least, sometimes more. I wish I had found you long before I did in 2019. Blessings to you and yours. Thank you. That means a lot to me. Blessings back to you, and good luck to you on the journey. I don't think that was to the Journey series. It wasn't. Then there was another, and this is the one, I gotta find this one, because it was weird. Okay, I don't know, Paul. Yes, AI sucks, but by the sound of it, it definitely knows that you don't think about your videos once you've posted them, and that's a bit scary. I'm not sure what that means comment-wise, but this is what the bot said. I think you are really onto something there. Never would that sentence ever leave my mouth ever. But here's the good one. Good thing I still control my channel, right? And then there's a smiley face emoji. And so those are the YouTube bot things. But anyways, let's get into the other stuff here. Okay, so I want to start with the Mel Gibson thing first. But it's so freaking gross that I think that YouTube might flag it even though they know it's a movie. It's just so bloody and icky. So let's start here. This is Pamela Joe Bondi. Joe with a J-O. It also could be, if it's Spanish, it could be Ho. Pamela Ho Bondi. And she is going to be the new Attorney General.
Thank you for visiting with me in my office. And I have to say...
that's like just creepy as fuck, right?
I'm sympathetic always to a former Attorney General.
This guy, just look at this Blumenthal MNFer. Like these people, they just look so creepy. They always look like they'd be a villain in a Lord of the Rings movie. Like this guy.
Particularly having been one myself, but I am... I have to say...
It's all about you, bro.
Also, really troubled, deeply disturbed by some of your responses.
You're deeply disturbed. You're so disturbed.
And non-responses to the question.
Like, we're just tired of the bullshit, right? You're saying this because she's a Republican, you're a Democrat. If it was reversed, it'd be the same thing. We're tired of this. You know, the people who are conscious are just tired of this bullshit, right?
That you've been asked today. You say the right things, that you're going to be the people's lawyer. That's what you have to say to be here. But I believe being the people's lawyer means you have to be able to say no to the President of the United States. You have to speak truth to power. You have to be able to say...
Oh, come on, bro. Just stop it.
...that Donald Trump lost the 2020 election.
Like, look at his fingers are, he's shaking here.
You dodged that question when you were asked directly by Senator Durbin. You have to be able to say that January 6th insurrectionists who committed violence shouldn't be pardoned. You have to be able to say...
So you're not going to vote for it anyway. So she's not going to agree with this, right? You know, how people view it is so subjective now. I've talked about this with my divorce. There was this growing division or, chasm between the way that I saw events that unfolded in our life and the way that my ex did. Like, one of us had to be crazy, maybe both, but one at least, right? Where, just memories were so distorted that I was like, I can't believe that's what you think happened, right? Like your interpretation of events or your description of events, like going to see a movie and then describing the movie completely different. Like you've seen two different movies, like two people describing something where you're saying, wait, they saw the same movie. That's impossible. And so not being able to, people's memories get distorted as time goes on and you remember things differently than they actually happened, especially if you don't think about them and attend to them as you get older. But, the division in the way people interpret events, and you can see this in relationships. And, the election in 2020 and January 6th, there's always going to be this chasm between these Democrats and these Republicans. Both of them see it wrong. They both have a political agenda. And, or they just don't even care about it. They just are bullshitting, right? Which is more likely the case.
That a nominee for the FBI director who says he has an enemy list. And that's just the beginning of what he has said in terms of politicizing, deeply weaponizing the FBI against political opponents.
How would anybody trust this guy? How do you vote for this guy? I know Trump's like a nightmare, but this guy, like, how do you pull the lever for this guy, right?
That he shouldn't be the FBI director. We have some history here with your predecessors, Barr, Sessions, and others. who perhaps sincerely, when they sat where you are now, said that they would say no, but they were working with a president that expected them to be his Roy Cohn, his personal attorney. Do you really think that you can avoid the disgrace that they encountered or the repercussions from the White House if you say no to the president? And so my question to you is,
You got a question?
can you say no to the president of the United States when he asks you to do something unethical or illegal?
Senator, first, I need to clarify something that you said, that I have to sit up here and say these things. No, I don't. I sit up here and speak the truth. I'm not going to sit up here and say
Your truth.
anything that I need to say to get confirmed by this body. I don't have to say anything. I will answer the questions to the best of my ability and honestly.
Let me ask you, an individual who says that he is going to, quote, come after, end quote, people he alleges, quote, help Joe Biden rig the presidential elections, that he has a list of people who are part of this deep state who should be prosecuted.
Remember that guy? Where did he go?
That he's going to close down the
Is
FBI
that Kash Patel?
building on his first day in office. Is that a person who appropriately should be the FBI director? Aren't those comments inappropriate? Shouldn't you disavow them and ask him to recant them?
Senator, I am not familiar with all those comments. I have not discussed those comments with Mr. Patel. What I do know
Well,
is
I'm
Mr.
asking you
Patel,
for your view.
Excuse me, what I do know is Mr. Patel was a career prosecutor. He was a career public defender defending.
You know, so there's just a chasm. I mean, this is kind of uninteresting. We'll see if there's any more with her thing. Any more pop up that are interesting as we go through this video later on tomorrow, whatever it is. But, you know, there's just a chasm here. And he's not voting for it no matter what. Like, it's just, why even bother? Like, the votes are already counted. I mean, they've already have the votes or they don't have the votes. I mean, that's how all these things work. So the rest of this is trying to get a viral moment and trying to pop in some way. And this guy, I mean, he should just, like, be hiding himself. Speaking of hiding himself, let's go to Toobin. Okay, today is Thursday, January 18th, I believe. I just saw it. Just looked at it. 16th. So I didn't look at it that well. It's this guy is giving his farewell speech. And we'll watch a little bit of it. I'll probably go to the end, see if there's more gaffes there. I'm sure that if there's gaffes, people will. There'll be clips sent to me or whatever it is, or it'll pop up on the YouTube feed. But he's saying goodbye.
My fellow Americans, I'm speaking to you tonight from the Oval Office. Before I begin, let me speak to important news from earlier today.
Are you going to take credit for the Israel hostage crisis?
After 8 months of nonstop negotiation, by my administration, a ceasefire and a hostage deal has been reached by Israel and Hamas, the elements of which I laid out in great detail in May of this year.
Okay, so he's going to take credit for this thing. I think he's going to have less gaffes. You know, they really probably rested him for this. I mean, I haven't seen him around. They're not covering him. Everything's focused on Trump. You know, he is getting no love and attention. Whatever's going on at the Jimmy Carter funeral was the last time he was like, people noticed him. And this will be his last moment, unless there's some kind of, I can't imagine there'll be anything about, he'll be, you know, walking into the sunset, the ghoul set. We'll go forward a little bit here.
I know that believing in the idea of America means respecting the institutions that govern a free society. The presidency,
That was a gaffe.
the Congress, the courts, a free and independent press.
Yeah, that's why you guys pressured all the social media people to, you censored them, right?
institutions that are rooted, they just might not reflect the timeless words, but they echo the words of the Declaration of Independence.
Okay, so I don't want to go back, but that's already a bunch of gaffes. And he's only 4 minutes into this thing. Like he's having trouble just reading the prompter. So, this is his last moment. This Trump's going to come in, so there's going to be that. Like Trump's was when they swear Trump in, he's going to be a part of that thing. And, but that's, the whole thing, the way that went down, right? And, maybe a few interviews, but I don't know, like what his team's going to do and his people and his handlers and all that. But he's clearly not able to do this. And they've arrested him. They've given whatever drugs he needs. And he can't do it. Like he can't get through the speech.
We hold these truths to be self-evident, rooted in the timeless words of the Constitution. We, the people. Our system of separation of powers, checks and balances. It may not be perfect, but it's maintained our democracy for nearly 250 years. Longer than any other nation in history that's ever tried such a bold experiment. In the past 4 years, our democracy has held strong. And every day I've kept my commitment to be president for all Americans through one of the toughest periods in our nation's history.
You did a great job, Ray. Ray. I have no idea why I called him Ray. It just came out that way. I'm just going to randomly move forward because his gaffes don't matter anymore, right? He's done. He's gone. Nobody cares about him. And everyone knows that he is not mentally up to the challenge like that. I was looking up at the chemtrails with my wife last night. And, there'll be a bullet for chemtrails underneath the thing. And, there's something happened differently with airplanes, which most of us all realize. There was contrails, and there were little bits of, like exhaust that would come out of a plane, and it would dissipate almost immediately, right? So that's the sky we grew up in. And at some point, they started to leave these vapor trails, and they would crisscross, and the planes were not going in any, if you see the planes in your area, we used to have a military base around us, so we'd have planes that would fly, my second farm with my family in Virginia, and we would get buzzed by those giant planes that had those, like, the giant propellers that could these planes that were half plane, half helicopter that could land vertically, and they have these giant propellers. They're like 15, 20 feet in diameter, something like that, just crazy big. And then we had fighter jets, and they would just buzz us and our cows, and, they were loud, they were low to the ground, right? And so there's things like that. But other than that, the planes that fly by your house, they're on a very disciplined flight plan, right? And the chemtrails, they go in all different directions. And they leave cloud cover, which I can see because I go out 3-4 times a day. I see the planes go by, I see the original chemtrail, come back and I see partial cloud. Come back later, the cloud's expanded. And it has this distinct multicolored, when the reflection, that when the sun goes through it, you can see the chemicals, right? And so many of us look up at the sky and see it all the time, right? For years now. And they still deny what we're seeing. And so the same thing happened with Joe Biden. They were denying what we were seeing with this guy. We saw that the guy is fucking, mentally fucked. Like I saw it back in 2019. And they've been like, no, he's great, they were talking about before when he was running against Hillary Clinton, they knew he had slipped. And they were mocking him, CNN and other, comedians. And so now it's just come to fruition. He's done. It's like they're pretending, well, yeah, he was kind of senile, but he's lost anyways, wasn't president. Let's give him a little bit of more, just some dignified send-off.
Could succeed. That's why I've upheld my duty to ensure a peaceful and orderly...
You're holding your duty right now? Are you holding your duty in your depends?
...transition of power, to ensure we lead by the power of our example. I have no doubt that America is in a position to continue to succeed. That's why my farewell address tonight, I want to warn the country of some things that give me great concern.
You mean the fact that Trump's going to, you were fighting for the very soul of America when.
This is a dangerous and that's a dangerous concentration of power in the
What?
hands.
What was that? Like, just so you can see, like, you can't even get through this.
Some things that give me great concern. This is a dangerous and that's a dangerous concentration of power
Concentration?
in the hands of a very few ultra-wealthy people. And the dangerous consequences if their abuse of power is left unchecked. Today, an oligarchy is taking shape in America of extreme wealth, power, and influence that literally threatens our entire democracy, our basic rights and freedoms, and a fair shot for everyone to get ahead. We see the consequences all across America, and we've seen it before, more than a century ago. But the American people stood up to the robber barons back then and busted the trusts. They didn't punish the wealthy. They just made the wealthy play by the rules everybody else had to. Workers want rights to earn their fair share. You know, they were dealt into the deal.
They were dealt into the deal.
Helped put us on a path to building the largest middle class, the most prosperous century any nation in the world has ever seen.
He's barely holding it together, even when he articulates his sentences correctly. Like, he doesn't seem to know what some of this stuff means.
6 decades later, I'm equally concerned about the potential rise of a tech industrial complex that could pose real dangers for our country as well.
They put that in there because of the internet. Like, they're losing it to the internet.
China must lead the world in the development of AI.
AI, he's giving warnings.
We can never lose that essential truth, remain who we are. I've always believed, and I've told other world leaders, America can be defined by one word: possibilities.
Possibilities. It could be defined. Here, let's just wrap this thing up.
Where the strengths of our institutions and the character of our people matter and must endure. Now it's your turn to stand guard. May you all be the keeper of the flame. May you keep the faith. I love America. You love it too.
You love it too. You dirty dogs. You love it. You love it.
God bless you all. And may God protect our troops. Thank you for this great honor.
Boom. I just watched that on C-SPAN. I chose C-SPAN on many different things. All right. So there he goes. Just Joe Biden disappeared after giving some stark warnings. And I would have listened to the whole thing. It's just, who cares? Like, it's just when something's over, it's over.
All right, breaking news, an earthquake in the world of social media that could be even bigger than we thought. Reports that TikTok is planning to shut down its app to users in the United States this Sunday, the day a federal ban is scheduled to take effect. Now, that ban was supposed to just mean that people couldn't update their apps. This goes much, much further. This means that people won't even be able to get in to TikTok.
No way. What's going to happen? What's going to fucking happen?
This new report comes from the tech site The Information. CNN's Claire Duffy is here. This is a huge deal.
Claire, you're young. You must know what's going on with TikTok. Let's bring in our youngest reporter.
This is much bigger than we thought it would be, and much
quicker. It's such huge. It's freaking huge.
Yeah, I imagine there are some creators on TikTok who are really freaking out now if they weren't already. ByteDance really had 3 options here. The first was to shut down TikTok altogether when this ban went into effect. The next was to sell TikTok to a non-Chinese owner. They've expressed very little interest so far in doing that, although we may be hearing some negotiating happening soon. And the third option was to essentially do nothing and allow the app stores to ban it, because it was always really the app stores who were on the hook to remove the platform from their app stores. And that's really what we expected, was that people just wouldn't be able to download the app if they got a new phone. They wouldn't be able to update it. But if you had the app on your phone, you would still be able to use it. Now, according to this new report, it sounds like people won't be able to access the app at all.
No way.
If they go on there, they'll be redirected to a site explaining the ban. Creators may be able to download their data, their old videos, but they won't actually be able to access TikTok. And this may be sort of a...
So I'm editing, and I just noticed this girl's got devil horns, right? She has devil horns. We're going to get into the Passion of the Christ and devil mocking him in a bit, but she has devil horns.
Negotiating tactic on the part of ByteDance. They obviously are going to have a lot of upset creators, and as they're trying to potentially work out a plan with the new Trump administration, that having lots of angry folks in the United States, 170 million American users, could be a leverage point for ByteDance here. We're
You'll go. You'll be able to see shit like this for a while.
already seeing creators move to a number of different alternative apps as people try to figure out sort of what's.
Okay, so I watched something else, like maybe the news yesterday, and they said a lot of them are going to alternative apps that are Chinese in origin, that are just as suspect as TikTok for Chinese spying. There's an update here. Let's go see the update.
Following today's oral arguments, the Supreme Court appears ready to uphold a ban on TikTok that is set to take effect in 9 days. The popular app is used by as many as 170 million users in the U.S. A bipartisan law orders TikTok to shut down in 9 days unless it finds a new owner that is not in China or the Supreme Court takes action.
To give you some background, lawmakers fear that through TikTok, China could acquire Americans' private data or could push propaganda that would sow discord. It's a risk that TikTok's lawyer acknowledged to the 9 justices this morning.
That they would use that information over time to develop spies, to turn people, to blackmail people, people who a generation from now will be working in the FBI or the CIA or in the State Department. Is that not a realistic assessment by Congress and the President of the risks here?
Well, Your Honor, I'm not disputing the risks. I certainly acknowledge the risk, but I think there are lots of reasons, not just the one I just gave, but there are lots of reasons why that risk still can't justify the law.
Let's get the latest on what happened today with CNN Chief Supreme Court Analyst Joan Biscuit.
You're old, Joan. You come in and you know about the Supreme Court. There's one more thing here. I just, it's like a nod story to me.
Big Joan, it looks like the justices are not going to block this ban.
It does, but I've got a couple caveats.
Joan always comes in with the caveats. Good job, Joan.
No, you could tell that they were with the federal government here in terms of the main motivation. But there are a couple questions. There are actually 3. First of all, is this a First Amendment infringement? And once you get past that, has the Congress passed a law that's narrowly tailored to kind of meet its compelling interest to override the First Amendment free speech interest? And then after that, what about timing? Because that did come up here. Could this possibly not take effect on January 19th, which is when it's scheduled to take effect, which of course is a day before President-elect Donald Trump comes in? First of all, on that exchange that you just listened to, there was so much.
All right. So the thing about is, either they know whether they're gathering data, and they are. Like, why wouldn't they be gathering data? That's all social media giants do. That means China is gathering data on American youth, and they have access to American youth. And so why would you let that happen, right? I mean, China's the big enemy. You're allowing no history would you allow your enemy access to your youths, where your youth would be attracted to them in some Pied Piper type of way. So they shouldn't have let this thing happen in the first place. Because why can't you? I mean, what's so special about this app? I mean, it's like they're going to other Chinese apps. Like, there's plenty of. You can't come up with a similar app to TikTok. I mean, the app isn't. I don't know what's special about the app. It's just an app. Like, it's a platform. And just tell these kids, you got to get fucking American, go to American app, right? Like, just, stop with you shouldn't allow any of these apps in the first place, right? Every app from a foreign country, like the biggest enemy that you have, and you're going to allow them to have access to phones and shit like that, with data. It's just, it's silly that this would even be allowed in the first place. I mean, you would just never do that. Like, no government would ever allow that to happen. TikTok is banning Facebook and all these other apps, right? And so, I mean, it's they don't have free speech there. And so, you as a government, you would never allow this. I mean, people can express themselves on American apps. It's just silly. But they've let it happen, so there must be a reason for it. There must be whatever. All right, let's go on to something else here. There's been so many sensational stories over the past 10 years, 5 years, more intensity over the last couple of years. And one of my viewers sent this to me on Instagram. It was a video of the said, like, most embarrassing moment or cringe moment in media history. And we all forget about these things. This wasn't that long ago. This is Jeffrey Toobin. And this happened.
Hi, Jeffrey.
Hello, Allison.
It's been a while.
It has been a while, indeed.
I feel like we should address what's happened in the months since we've seen you, since some of our viewers may not know what has happened. So I guess I'll recap. I'll do the honors.
Help yourself.
Okay.
This is Allison Camarada.
In October, you were on a Zoom call with your colleagues from the New Yorker magazine. Everyone took a break for several minutes, during which time you were caught masturbating on camera. You were subsequently fired from that job after 27 years of working there. And
holy shit, right? So that happened. This guy was a regular person on CNN, right? So they were having a meeting. They took a break. He didn't realize his camera was still on, and he masturbated in front of everybody. And then, whatever happened,
you since then have been on leave from CNN. Do I have all that right?
You got it all right. Sad to say.
Okay, so let's start there.
Okay.
To quote Jay Leno, what the hell were you thinking?
Well, obviously, I wasn't thinking very well or very much, and it was something that was inexplicable to me. I think one point...
Well, how is it inexplicable to you? How is it inexplicable to you? Like, what was inexplicable about it? What happened in this moment, right? Like, that this happened. Like, you're sitting there in a business meeting on a Zoom call, and immediately after that, you decide to masturbate in front of your computer, and you didn't know the camera was on. How was that inexplicable? Like, I understand it, and we all understand it, and we weren't involved in it, right? We know what happened. She just explained it. It's not inexplicable. She just explained it perfectly well. And so it's not inexplicable.
I wouldn't exactly say in my defense, because nothing is really in my defense. I didn't think I was on the call. I didn't think other people could see me.
You thought that you had turned off your camera?
Correct. I thought that I had turned off the Zoom call. Now, that's not a defense. This was deeply...
Well, you're using a defense.
Moronic and indefensible.
It's moronic? It's fucking weird, bro. Because I don't know how old this guy is. He's probably 60s or 50s, whatever. So your sex drive is just less as you get older. This isn't like some, young 18, 20-year-old man, college kid or something, right? This is an old, creepy dude. And, what was happening during the Zoom call that you were so aroused, right, that you decided, this name's Toobin. I don't know if this was just fake in some humiliation ritual, but it's so weird. What's so special about this guy, because I've seen him on CNN before, that you need to bring him back? Now, I don't know if they still have him there. I don't know if he's still, this was like a moment where he came back. But why do you need the guy? You got all these other bullshit pundits that suck, right? None of them are worth this. So, if they have this kind of moment. And just the shame and the embarrassment of this, right? Like, you're this old, you've lost your job, and now you got to come and do this and talk about this, right? It's so fucked up. Like, and this just got buried. Remember, this was a big story for like a day or two. And then, but it's coming back around because somebody posted something on Instagram that's being shared. But this happened, right? And it's weird. And, he says, like, in his defense, that he didn't know he was on camera. So how many times has this happened before? Is this a regular habit of yours when you're on TikTok videos, right?
But, that is part of that is part of the story. And, you know, I have spent the 7 subsequent months, miserable months in my life, I can certainly confess.
You can confess you were miserable? Confession.
Trying to be a better person. I mean, in therapy, trying to do some public service, working in a food bank, which I certainly...
So you went to a food bank. You thought the antidote for jerking off in a Zoom call was to work in a food bank. You thought, hey, I think to reverse this problem I have. He's 64 years old now. So it was 4 years ago, 2020. I looked it up. So he was 60 years old when he did this, right? And weird behavior, caught on camera, scandal, ultra embarrassing, right? And he comes back, you know, whatever, 7 months later, and there's really nothing to say. And I don't think, you know, I mean, I haven't seen him on CNN. I don't know, like, he's definitely not used. He used to be on there quite a bit. And then he had a job at the New Yorker, which now, like, all that's dried up, like, whatever's happened. And I didn't mean to make a metaphor, you know, that was just an unintentional pun. But he's, you know, like, how is he even doing this? Like, how humiliating. Like, this is just, there's no excuse for a 60-year-old dude.
I continue to do, working on a new book about the Oklahoma City bombing, but I am trying to become the kind of person that people can trust again.
Okay, so nobody's thinking that. Like, you know, I don't know how you reverse something like this, right? It's just weird. You know, it's not just the bad decision making, it's the, you know, it's his age, it's now, like, it's just something you don't want to know about. So, like, you're looking at the guy, that's all you can remember him for. That's what he's going to be remembered for. His name's frickin' Toobin. You know, he's Toobin.
I'm sure you've replayed that embarrassing moment over and over many times. Have you ever thought about
You mean
what
video-wise? What are you talking about, replay it?
it must have been like to be on the receiving end of that Zoom call?
Well, I haven't just thought about it. I've spoken to several of my former colleagues at the
How many people were on that fucking thing?
About it, and you know, they were shocked and appalled. I think they realized that this was not intended for them. I think they realized that this was something that I would immediately regret, as I certainly did. And it was
It's just so weird just even talking about it. Like, it's just so greasy. It's like cringe. So it is cringe.
And it was that day that I began apologizing, and that is something that I have tried to continue to do, both publicly and privately. You know, we've covered a lot of political scandals, and we've heard what I like to think of as the politician apology, which is, you know, I'm sorry if you were offended, which always sounds to me like I've said the words, now get off my back. That's exactly what I've tried not to do. I mean, I have tried...
I tried to do a little legitimate apology.
And I'm trying now to say how sorry I am, sincerely, in all...
See, the thing is, what this is about, and I'm going to end this here, this thing, I just want to get off of it. It's just creepy. It's, you know, it's just the whole thing's icky, right? But when you work as a therapist or counselor or something like this, and you have to do assessments, personality assessments, psychological assessments, these type of things, right? And if you work in, like, you know, I worked in treatment centers where there had to be, you know, with teenage sex offenders, where when you're releasing them back out into the public, you kind of want to know if they're cured or whatever. And they're never cured, right? If they're going to reoffend, and that's what everyone wants to know. The state, the sending, whoever's being billed for this $120,000 a year for this treatment center, the parole board, you know, the parole officer or the social worker or the people that are in charge of this kid, they want to know if the kid's going to go out there and reoffend. And you never really know, but you suspect that there's going to be, I mean, problems ahead because people just don't change, right? And, you know, people present whatever they present as the version of the person they want everyone else to think they are, right? So you have this stuff on social media where people take multiple pictures, and they're always trying to do like a, so like they're self publicists trying to make themselves look better and happier and different than they actually are. And people hide their darkest thoughts, their darkest fears, I mean, even from themselves. There's suppression of these things. And then whatever kind of deviant behaviors they have, right? And so when something like this happens, it leaves you like an insight into this guy's internal world. A little peek into like whatever his motivation was for this thing that happened, right? And that the big thing he said there is, I thought I was off camera, right? And so the fact it was caught on camera is the thing, but it's weird that he did that. He's on a call with these multiple people, and that aroused him in some way, right? And whatever, and then whatever his choices were and his, urges, I just like, it's just icky just thinking about, right? This guy's, some old guy, and he had a reputation on CNN, New Yorker. I think he went on, probably was one of these people that hated Trump. I mean, just whatever. He was one of those. I think he was a big kind of suppressor of, like he said, he's doing something on, he wrote a book on the Oklahoma City bombing. It isn't going to be about how the government was a part of the problem, right? It's not going to be something like that. It'll be about domestic terrorists and this kind of, anti-conspiracy theorist kind of stuff, right? And so, he's somebody who's probably a part of their whole team about destroying the truth community and all these things. But he let people know that there's other things going on inside of him that aren't kosher, right? That are just strange and weird. And then people start thinking, well, what else? Every time he's on a Zoom call, what's going on with Toobin, right? And so you get an insight here of his depraved and twisted internal world. These people who I think he covered a lot of scandals, and that was always, going after people. And then he has his own, right? Just like this whole thing. So that's Toobin. And again, 2020, and, it's forgotten. Like I had forgotten all about this 4 years ago, now 5 years ago. And he, I haven't seen him in the last so many years, so I think he's just, he canceled himself, right? Okay, so speaking of creepy internal worlds, I watched multiple clips of Passion of the Christ, and I have a lot to say about this, because this whole Mel Gibson interview with Joe Rogan, and his house burning down to fire, and Mel Gibson just being so weird, and his weird movements and weird facial expressions. Like he always played these crazy people, that cop from whatever it was, Lethal Weapon, right? And then he was just strange. He was a strange, crazy person. And so the clips that I saw were all Jesus bloody and battered, and it was just horrific, like bad. And why in the world anyone would do this? Because several people left comments saying how twisted the movie was. And this must be Christian people who watched it. And, well, let's just watch a little bit of this thing here. Okay, so I'm going to get rid of the music because I'm sure that'll cause copyright issues. But they're beating Jesus, and this guy's smiling, right? And Jesus is, this baby, this creepy woman, and this baby comes up behind him. They're playing this, demonic kind of choir music. And the baby's just, big and creepy. He's being, this is beaten, right? He's being beaten while this happens. So I don't know how much I'm going to be able to use of this, but definitely getting rid of the music is key. And he's, being tortured. And throughout this movie, look at the faces of these guys and the pain undergoing. And Mel Gibson, this is what he wanted to see as a movie. And this baby was, just this whole thing. This is Mel Gibson's interpretation. And this baby is this, adult male Satan creature. And he's staring and smiling at Jesus as he gets mocked and he's beaten here. Just this creepy thing. Like, just, come on. Like, this is, why is this in the movie, right? What's wrong with you that this is what you envisioned? So the Christian religion, made the mistake of making Jesus a story about materialism in a couple of different ways. The two most significant ways are focusing on supernatural things like miracles, making him to him like a superhero, right? Bigger than life. And then focusing on the crucifixion, right? The bloody crucifixion, making it about blood and physical pain and not emotional pain. And so let's talk about the cities, the powers, first of all. And so when you go on your spiritual journey, there are these things called cities. Siddihs, something like that. I didn't spell it right. I looked it up here, and it says, AI overview. City powers are supernatural abilities or achievements that are said to be acquired through psychic or magical terms. The word city comes from Sanskrit. It means supernatural power. Again, that's not an accurate description, but it comes from your spiritual pursuit. And there's two things here I want to address that were talked about in the Sagemark system. One was the idea of a boon, where you would be given a boon because you did something, and some higher developed soul would bless you with a some kind of whatever you asked for. And the second thing is when you would do austerity. So there's a time where people lived thousands of years, right? Hundreds of years, thousands of years. And they would go out and meditate and pray to a certain high-level soul, cosmic functionary, what people would call gods. And if they did these austerities, like they were in physical pain, and they meditated and they sacrificed their whatever it was. They just sat under a tree and meditated for 20 years, hundreds of years, right? This soul had to come down and grant them whatever they asked for. It could be the soul of the sun. It could be, Vishnu or Shiva or one of these, these cosmic functionaries. And if somebody prayed to them for a certain period of time and, underwent a certain level of pain, the soul, the saint would, the higher developed soul had to give them whatever they asked for. And there was an example of this. Like, here's a good example. One guy asked for the touch of death. If he put his hand on the top of anybody's head, they would incinerate. They would just go up in flames. They would just evaporate. They would turn into dust. And he prayed to Shiva, the god of destruction, and this guy was just walking around, and he turned demonic, and the demonic king, and he was just ruling with fear of people that were scared that he was going to eviscerate them, and he just became this demon, and anytime anybody displeased him, he would just eviscerate him, right? And Vishnu went to Shiva and said, "What the fuck," right? Like, this is a nightmare. Vishnu was in charge of preservation, saying, "We got to stop this guy." He goes, "What could I do? He did the freaking austerities, and the rules. I had to give him whatever he wanted." So Vishnu came down and incarnated as like some beautiful woman, and went up to the guy, and the guy wanted to have her, and she said, the beautiful woman said to him, "Okay, but you gotta go shampoo your hair." The guy touched the top of his own head and eviscerated himself, right? Which is a good example of these powers. And so there was a guy, Don Savarin. He was this Canadian guy. He was like a natural healer. He was a registered nurse, and he was like a chiropractor, and these things. He was a big personality, and I had a bunch of conversations with him, and he knew about these things. And he gave a talk about how when he was taking care of Babaji for like a couple of months in India. He flew over from Canada and stayed at Babaji's house, and Babaji was sick, and he took care of him. And Babaji said, I want to give you a boon for taking care of me. And Don knew that every time someone was given a boon, was given some of these cities, these powers, the powers ate him alive. The powers overwhelmed the person, they got the better of the person, and the person had this giant spiritual fall and all these things. So he thought about it. He said, look, I want you to get better. That's my boon. And Bob's just like, no, I want to give you something. He said, no, like, I don't want anything like that. Just, you're my patient, and I want you to, I want to see you healthy. That's like would be a blessing. And, Babaji progressively put on weight. He had an ulcer and things like that. And Don took this famous picture of him, which was behind Don. He came to America at the ashram. He was giving this talk. And the picture was behind him while he was giving the talk. And, Babaji's sitting there looking kind of glowing, like he looks physically fit and things. He was in probably his late 60s, 70s. And he had a remarkable recovery. And in this guy Don's talk, he was saying how all these powers and things, always, bit the person in the ass, right? And, people would do these austerities, and also as you went on your spiritual journey and you have all these power points in your system. And at each level, you're able to do things. Like miracles is something that happens on an early level. Material manifestation of things. There's a lot of kind of fraudulent gurus that have reached a low level and are able to do these sort of magic tricks, like miracle tricks, that Jesus was able to do, right? Jesus went to India and he learned some of these yogic powers and tricks, and he came back to where he was and he demonstrated these things, right? And, to no avail, because his disciples and everyone else turned on him. And so miracles don't work to convince people, even when they see them. Even if they see that you have these, whatever it is, these powers or whatever it is, right? It doesn't do anything for them, and it screws you over because it takes you off your path of your spiritual path, which is to accept everything. The real power in spirituality is to accept everything that happens as for your benefit and not change anything unless God orders you to change it. And that's the only reason to have any of these powers. And people with that kind of discipline are very rare. Most people get these powers, and then the powers, they go to their head, or just even some celebrity, some fame, some following, and that goes to their head, and they start getting shitty about it, right? They start losing their way. And people having these powers has not helped humanity one fucking bit, right? Because this has been going on for thousands and thousands of years, hundreds of thousands of years. And some of these souls who lived 10,000 years and would meditate for 10,000 years, and they would gain all kinds of abilities, they didn't move one step in their spiritual journey, right? There's these various spiritual points your soul goes on, the yatra of your soul, the journey of your soul, right? The Journey series is about that, and that and other things that I talk about on my, the membership thing now. And this will be part of it. This whole thing will be, I'll add that to the next one. So you can get all these powers, or some of them, or one of them, or all, what doesn't matter. It doesn't help you on your spiritual journey. In fact, it distracts you because you start using these powers for material benefit, which Jesus did. And sometimes you use it as like showing off, which Jesus also did, which is a huge mistake. And Jesus is not the only person to fall for these, the allure of the power, right? And so in the Sajmark system, you go through these various spiritual points, but the cities, the powers that are there at each one of these points lays dormant. You don't get the power of the only power that you have is the power, the ability to transmit and clean people's hearts using your will force and this Pranhuiti, this divine energy, the utilization of the divine energy for the transformation of man is how it's defined. And I'm grateful for that, because I know that I would misuse the powers, whatever powers that would be there. Because it's as easy as having a thought. It's as easy as having a bad day and knowing that you, through your own force of will, you could change something and you could punish people. And you could, all these things. I mean, these curses work, right? And in India, like if you read the Mahabharata, the whole story wouldn't have happened. And you can call it a tragedy or whatever it is. The whole drama wouldn't have happened if people didn't have the ability to curse other people. Like curses are like responsible for all the bad shit that happens. And there's these saints and higher developed souls that are just cursing people. And the curses completely fuck the story up, right? Because, you know, and the curses are part of the divine plan, so it is what it is, whatever, you know, it's part of the thing. But it's not a higher level, you know, part of it. And when you become a spiritual person and you rise up to higher levels, then you have access to manifestation of things much, you know, in an easier way than the normal person. You know, the third eye opens up, the kundalini opens up, and then all these other centers open up. And you could just think things, and they, you know, if you want something, you just think it and it comes to you. And so you have to be extraordinarily disciplined and only use these things when God says, hey, I want you to use these powers to do this. And, you know, when you use these spiritual powers, you feel powerful. You feel good, like you can, you know, whatever it might be, right? And so, you know, there's, you have to pick it up like a tool and put it back down and forget that you have it, unless God reminds you and says, yeah, I want you to do something else. And that would be the only reason to use them, right? Which wasn't the case with Jesus and Christianity. So they focused on his powers and turned him into this superhuman being, because that's the kind of people that they're trying to draw, you know, superhero fans, people who would be impressed by, you know, these basically parlor tricks. You know, this has happened now with Dodgy, you know, his goofy, you know, scams that he's doing, Brighter Mind scam, right? Instead of using the spiritual energy for its one true purpose, is that to advance you on your spiritual journey, that you endure the pains and sufferings of your life, and through that process you evolve spiritually. And Christianity made the mistake of taking Jesus' story to a lower level, right? So the second part about this is the crucifixion and the blood. So they decided to make you feel guilty and a piece of shit that you were a born sinner. This is Mel Gibson's, you know, torturous life here, and torture Jesus in this capacity, you know, with this, you know, devil mocking him and him being all bloody and shit. And you know, I reluctantly put these pictures up again. The kid and the, you know, him being all, you know, mangled and stuff in the cross. Apparently he's making, the reason he's doing his rounds is he's made Passion of the Christ Part 2, the resurrection. And I want to get into that a little bit too here. So Mel Gibson's releasing that in 2025. And so it's a horrible movie. And, you know, it's all in subtitles. And Joe Rogan was talking about how great it is to have it in subtitles. And I'm like, it's never better in subtitles. And he does it in Aramaic, Hebrew, and also in Latin. Of course, Jesus didn't speak Latin. I'm not sure, you know, what the value for doing it in those languages was. In the beginning, he didn't even want subtitles. So they were going to speak these, you know, these words, and you weren't going to, I mean, you might hear them and know what Jesus was saying because you've read the Bible. And maybe that was part of it. But then, you know, you're excluding other people from it. But it's a horrific film, you know, the blood and the gore, and I'll get into that in a moment, right? But the focus on the crucifix as the symbol, like you see the cross, and you're focused on the worst moment of his life. And, you know, they look at this as his being liberated or him dying for your sins, which is all bullshit. You know, that's all fake. So that's like a big part of it, that they've, you know, lied about these things. But the real pain and suffering Jesus suffered was his disciples, for the most part, all turned on him. 3 of them, you know, Judas, of course, the worst one, and then Thomas doubted him, and Peter, the guy he left in charge of his church, denied him. Said, yeah, I wasn't with Jesus. I don't know that guy, right? So, but even before that, all these people that were around him, all the people, they were out there throwing shit at him and spitting on him and stuff like this, right? And before that, they turned on him. And this happens all the time. You know, this is why I make reference to this in my own personal, whatever I'm willing to do in terms of keeping the Sajmark system alive and Gratefulness meditation. You know, I'm not willing to go out on a limb for people who are doing it, because I said, you know, people will turn on you. Master Chargy says it's 1 out of 12, but it's really everybody. I mean, the way that, you know, I've seen what's happened in Sajmark. All these people claim they love Chargy in ways that I never felt comfortable, right? And they would weep when he, you know, they had to leave his presence. And, you know, you could feel the energy. I knew why they were doing it. And they talked about him and how grateful they were for him. And then this piece of shit disciple of his takes over, Dodgy, and completely sticks a knife in his back and destroys his legacy and starts slandering the guy and, trying to find any possible way not to celebrate his birthday and erase him from the mission, right? And all these people have gone along with it. I mean, it's despicable. These weak motherfuckers, who are incapable. First, they're in denial and they're sheeple. Yeah, that's whatever. But on top of that, they've allowed and saw these things, and they, celebrated. They're all, oh, we love you, Dodgy. And it takes a person on a higher level to feel the transmission and do the Sage-Mark system. Like it used to be 1 out of 30, 1 out of 40 people would stay. So, I mean, it's 1 out of 40. It's like, 1 out of 100. And then the really good people, I mean, it was probably 1 out of 1,000. Like people who really got it. Some people come and go, but people really feel the energy, and this is their thing. There's probably about 5 or 10,000 people around the world that would this was everything to them. Like I can't describe it, but a lot of people just can't even participate in the system. They can't do the meditation. They can't feel the transmission. I was just covering in my last video how somebody said they talked to their families about divinity being inside of them, their family members, about divinity being inside of them, and their families don't get it, and another person said, yeah, they don't get it. Me too. People can't even just get the idea of God inside of them, even though it's obviously has to be there if God is everything and God created you, and you have a soul, then there's divinity within you and everybody else and everything in the universe, right? It's an easy concept to understand, but people can't do it. They can't even get the idea about it, never mind do something about it, like find the divinity within them. They don't know where to start, and the whole idea frightens them, and this makes them feel uncomfortable. That's why religions have gone in the direction they have, because the majority of people can't do the slightest little spiritual movement. The massive amount of people that are just incapable of abstract thought, 60% of the population or more. And so it's just not an option for them. The people who are hyper-material, people who are just brutes, have no ability for refined thought, right? And so there's people who were elevated enough to be able to participate in this system and be grateful enough because they've lived past lives, maybe lived thousands of years, and maybe had these cities and had these powers and had these abilities, and they didn't move one iota in their spiritual yatra, their spiritual journey. And so it was, and then they turn on a guy like that, right? So, and, the refined nature of the cleaning process, and we all experienced it. I had individual sittings with Chargy and spent time with them, right? And, you just feel loyalty towards them. And when this guy Dodgy came in and started frickin' not only, pumping the guy up like what he's supposed to do, and, say it's all about master, this is his master, whatever it is. This whole master-disciple thing they have in India, just totally violate it, right? I mean, violate spiritual principles in a dickish way, in an incompetent way. And they still, they're out of their personal weakness or their personal position as a preceptor or whatever it is. They just caved. And so I understand this like you understand this from if you've had people that you've done things for, especially like your kids, or if you're like a boss and you're trying to keep your business alive and for your employees, and the employees strike and they turn on you when you're struggling just to keep the whole thing going, and they stab you in the back and they blame you like you've been, like you're greedy or something, and you've been like not even taking a salary, like something like that, like, things like this that people endure. Your followers and people that you're helping out will turn on you and bite the hand that feeds you, but feeds them over and over again. And, on a massive level, with a bigger level with Jesus, right? And then all the people since then that have shit all over Jesus's legacy and celebrating his worst moment of his life, the crucifixion. But it wasn't the physical pain, which, physical torture, which is horrible, was as bad as breaking the guy's heart by, doing what they did, right? Turning on him, all his disciples, all these people. And that's the real suffering. And it wasn't to elevate those people, those sinners, right? It's a reversal of the story. It's a big fucking lie, right? Because this has happened over and over again. And many of us on a soul level who have done this kind of work has experienced this, right? It's where, I went to this sort of this spiritual class. You know, I had a therapist. My ex-girlfriend was a nurse, and she went into therapy. And this woman was at MSW who did channeling. It was in Connecticut. And she was helpful, and she's the one who ended up telling me about Sagemark. But she didn't stick with it. She quit for various reasons. But, you know, it was a blessing for me. And she had gone to this class, and after I was done with therapy, you know, my girlfriend, we were engaged for some period of time. She and I went and took the class. And the woman, you know, was this channeler, but she was messed up emotionally. Like oftentimes people with psychic abilities are. And we went for a private session, and she said, you know, she did readings of people. And I knew that some of the stuff she was saying was true. And I knew that some of it, you know, she was just not people, like I said, people with psychic abilities, you know, some of the stuff is true and some of the stuff is imagined. And, you know, there's mental illness there as well. So it's just like, you know, the whole thing, the whole package. But she said that I had been a soul in the past life that came down to do service, and my disciples, my people who followed me, turned on me, right? Which, you know, I could see that being a part of it. She said that quite a bit as one of the narratives, because it happens quite a bit. Like, it happens a lot, where higher developed souls come down, you know, souls that have a spiritual nature from maybe a different part of the etheric universe, and they descend down, and then they start working for, you know, God in some capacity to elevate people. But then after a while, they forget about working for God, and they start working for the people that they're supposed to serve. You know, they're supposed to serve through working for God, working through God, you know, working for God. And the people turn on them. And the people, or just the misery of the people, and you can't help the people. You can't elevate them. They just keep on, you know, this is the real problem with people, is if people are given a choice between the higher and the lower, they'll choose the higher sometimes. Some people will choose the higher. Most people won't. But they'll choose the higher for some period of time, whatever the higher represents for them, right? But it's always something on the spiritual level, but whatever level they can do spiritually. And they'll choose it for a little while, which is great. But then they'll be pulled back down. And even higher developed souls that come down to Earth, and they're already on a higher level, they get pulled back down to the mundane aspects of physical life on planet Earth. There's just a lower vibration here, and it tends towards pulling people down to a lower level. And so, as much as people aspire to be better, at some point they won't. And this is very present in the story of Jesus, right? And all the people around him, and then his own, he forgot about working for God, and he turned his attention towards his followers, and then they stabbed him in the back. And so when he said, "Father, why hast thou forsaken me?" it was he that forgot about God, right? Because the miserable masses, and it becomes overwhelming because people, you get mired in their miseries, and you can't help anybody, and these people just are, they can't help themselves, and you can't help them, and you get depressed and all these things, and they turn on you. I mean, all this stuff, right? And so he's sitting there getting crucified, but it was that failure on his part, but mostly on their part, that, even if he hadn't failed, people would still turn on you, because that's what they fucking do. It's unfortunate, and maybe this won't be the case forever. We'll see fairly soon, because we're at a transition point. People are going to be given the option of going up or going down or being obliterated. And, that's what going down ultimately would, there'd no longer be people here. It would be considered a failure. That human beings will never get it. They'll never embrace their higher nature. At some point, it's like taking a kid and throwing him out there in the ocean, and they either sink or they swim. And people used to do that shit, right? That's how they taught kids how to swim. They throw them in the deep water, and the kid either drowned or they would swim, right? And that's, pretty harsh, but, in your life that happens at one point or another. There's a time where your kids have to go out on their own, even though they won't leave the house, right? They won't leave the nest. And you got to push them out the nest, right? Like these things. This happens for, many parents nowadays, where kids just don't want to go out and live their life and take on their adult responsibilities, because addicted to video games and the internet. Like, these are very common things, right? And so, but it's always an issue. So sometimes a kid's got to go out there. You know, I remember my sister was a gym teacher, and there was several, you know, my dad had some panic attacks. My brother had agoraphobia. And I was sitting in the car as a little kid. My mom must have been driving me to school, and she dropped my sister off first. And I don't even remember, because I walked to school, like, I don't even know what the time frame is. My sister was 10 years older than me. And so she was driving me, it might have been in the summer, she was driving me somewhere. And my sister, well, she was working in a school as a teacher, so I don't remember the specifics about it. But my sister would be having a panic attack and crying, and my mom would have to force her out of the car. So she would go in there and do her internship. And, you know, I mean, it's just like these things, like, you know, there's just these things that people have to get over. And my sister was she was a cheerleader and a great athlete. You know, I think she was very popular in school. But she, you know, she had this panic attacks, right? And she'd go to school, she'd go there and she'd do fine. She'd come home, she said it was great, you know. But every morning she had to be forced out of the car. Like, my mom almost had to put her feet on her and, like, open the door and kick her out of the car. I was like, wow, this just sucks. Like, you know, I was a little kid. I don't know. I must have been like 11, 12 years old. I must have been like 13, because I went to a Catholic school for 1 year with some nuns. And my mom had to drive me there because it was far away. When I was in, I think, 7th or 8th grade, maybe 8th grade. So that's when that happened. But anyways, you know, all these things have to be done in some capacity where you have to rip the Band-Aid off, and there has to be a choice point, and people are going to have to embrace their higher nature or not. And then they have to make a decision about what to do with us all, right? Because, you know, a lower tendencies, intelligence, you know, people with the capacity for destruction, nuclear destruction, weapons of mass destruction, all these other things, and even spiritual powers, these cities and things that people can to obtain, can't be trusted to, you know, undisciplined, unevolved people who won't embrace their higher nature can't be allowed to have that kind of capacity, that kind of power, right? That kind of capacity, that kind of power has to be balanced with discipline. And so, you know, in all this, right, you have the crucifixion that's celebrated. And it isn't a moment of Jesus's, you know, liberation or his, you know, his ascending. It's a moment where he feels like shit because the people that he served turned on him. And he's dying with the sense of failure. Of course, the religion's going to then twist his story, and it's going to even go to a lower level. So whatever he was telling his disciples and all these things from a higher level is now going to go to a lower level. So let's get to the gore and the passion of the Christ, right? With all that having been said, that if you love Jesus, then the idea of seeing him up on a screen in some twisted, you know, Hollywood presentation, you know, a Hollywood person like Mel Gibson, you know, very Hollywood. I mean, he's a ex-Catholic, or, you know, whatever kind of Catholic truther, whatever he is, who is a part of the Hollywood beast and engaged in a lot of these low-level behaviors, you know, seeing himself as a born sinner and being a twisted person with psychological, maybe even neurological issues. And an obsession with the blood and the gore. This is like a horror movie, right? And that you're celebrating this thing as some triumphant moment where Jesus is suffering these tortures, as did his disciples and many saints that would follow in the Christian tradition and other spiritual people across the globe, as a way that they could die for other people's sins, that your fucking actions and your behaviors and your lack of discipline and your lower nature that you can't rise above is, you know, again, there's a choice point coming where people have to rise above their lower nature. There's none of this bullshit that you're a born sinner. You have the potential to be a Jesus, right? You have a potential to be a saint or a higher developed soul. I mean, even better than Jesus. Like, Jesus didn't make it. Like, he had some spiritual evolution, but it was limited. And of course, there's a fall at the end of his life. So everyone has that potential in them. And we just don't want to embrace it, right? And I know this more than other people. Like, I understand the issue here from, personal experience and seeing other people go through this. And whatever I have experienced in past lives, it's just there, right? That this pattern of behavior where some higher developed soul comes down and there's a spiritual movement, and he's with other higher developed souls. There's more than one person doing this. He had his disciples, and there's, happens time and time again. There's other people in India that taught Jesus, that Jesus learned from. Jesus had, he had gurus that they don't want to tell you about. They had teachers and things, right? And so, there's all these higher developed souls that are part of this, and it doesn't work. Like, people still suck, and are sucking worse and worse, and like now more than ever. We're going down a path of idiocracy in the wrong direction. And a part of this is because you're thinking you're a born sinner. That's what you're told. That you're a piece of shit that never can rise to a higher level. You don't have a higher nature. And so that's one of the horrible things about the Christian religion. It's satanic, demonic. It's hurtful to everybody. And Mel Gibson celebrating this thing where he's pounding the nails into, it's his hands in the scenes that he's pounding the nails into Jesus' wrists, where he's tacking them up to the cross, and Jesus is being beaten and whipped and all these things and all the blood and all the stuff. In some way to make you feel like a piece of shit and that this is on you and Jesus did this for you and this is his sacrifice, and none of those things are fucking true, right? And watching this guy that you're supposed to love suffer is horrible. I mean, anybody who has any positive feelings for Jesus should never, this is a horrible movie. The suffering isn't, you don't need to see the graphic suffering. You shouldn't see it, right? There's the third master of the Sajmark system, the one that I knew, Master Charji. He was nominated by Babaji to be his successor, and Babaji wrote it on a little piece of paper, almost like a napkin, that you're my successor. And he only told a few people about it. And, people knew about it, but when he died, Charji had been sort of like he would push people away from Babaji. He would, be like almost like a bouncer at times. He was, Babaji was this small little guy who was very Yoda-esque. And he would say things like only forbidden is forbidden because he didn't want people suffering the sins of disobedience to the master, and which the hippies loved, right? The undisciplined hippies who were taking LSD and, free love and free, drinking and shit at gatherings and all the shit they shouldn't be doing. And so he told Charji you have to bring discipline into the mission. And Charji started to do that, and they turned on him. But even before that, they turned on him. Babaji's kids turned on him, and they tried to claim the ashram and these other properties for their own. It was a whole thing. Charji was poisoned. His ultimate disciple, Kamash Patel, drove around in a car with a gun and wanted to kill him. Another assassin came to an ashram and was going to kill him, and Charji went up and said, "Go ahead, kill me." And the guy said, "No, I can see you're the real deal." Charji said, "Well, why don't you stay and do the meditation?" The guy said, "Well, if I do that, I'm a dead man because, people have to be intimidated by me because I've done bad shit or whatever." But the guy refused to kill him, right? And, he took poison. He had this like horrible reaction to the poison. Like he knew there was poison. He took it anyway, right? And so, in all that, it was a bad time. And right after he died, there was a diary of his that was published. And it was the diary of Babaji's death. And Babaji went into a coma for about 6 months. And during that time, people were trying to get Charji away from him. Like Charji went to his bedside and was, at the hospital and was taking care of him. And the people were trying to keep him away from Babaji's comatose body and trying to get him out of the mission. They were trying to, make it so he wasn't going to be able to become the head of the mission, right? And it was gross, and and Charji was suffering, and people had said things like Babaji had turned on him, and Charji was like feeling like a piece of shit about all these things, and he wrote about it in a diary. It was hard to read, and there was these letters that he had written to people that were turned into a series of books called The Spider's Web, and my ex had worked on these books, and some of the letters were personal in nature, and one of the editors, like these were all volunteer, they were all women voluntarily going through these letters, and they made this book called Abiding in Him that were very personal letters that were never printed. The book was never printed. And I had read the book, and it really changed me. Like, when I read the book, I saw Chargy as a human being and how he suffered. You know, so this is this period of time where he was being told by some people, take a hard line on all these fucking people that are doubting you. Take a hard line and just, you know, and other people are being like, oh, just don't do anything, be soft and, you know, be spiritual and don't, you know. And he was put in the middle of these, you know, these two groups of his supporters, his alleged supporters, many of whom I'm sure have now turned on him, right? Or allowed his legacy to be tainted. But I read the book when I was working at, you know, the treatment center as with a master's degree in counseling with sex offenders. And it really transformed me. Like, I just was moved by the book. Like, Chargy was always he was a big guy with a gruff voice, and he was intimidating, and he just, you know, he was just good at everything. But, like, I saw him more of as a human being in his struggles. And so I reprinted that book. I had it on my computer, and I reprinted it. And, you know, I underestimated the suffering. Like, I didn't remember, you know, the specifics about the book. In so many letters, he's just the anguish in the letters. And so I read his diary, this, you know, published diary, and these letters at the same time. So this is 2017, something like this. You know, I just returned back to America, and I was, you know, going through a divorce, all these things, and 2017, 18, and I was so miserable. You know, I talked about this a little bit on some of my videos. Like, it was so painful to read. And, like, I had to get through it because I started it and I had to get through it. But I'll never read those books again. And it was just seeing his suffering and really feeling his suffering, right? His emotional suffering. You know, 90% of the people had turned on him, and he was just lost, and, you know, things weren't going in a way that he had anticipated with being able to intercommune with Babaji, like Babaji had intercommuned with his previous master. You know, the Whispers of the Brighter World messages, which I've read, would eventually help alleviate that issue. But that was, you know, also painful for him. But just you could feel the pain. Like, I could feel his pain. And I didn't like it, right? I didn't, you know, I just watched listening to somebody that, you know, I loved and respected and, you know, just suffer. Watching a loved one suffer. And we've seen this, you know, you see it with your family members, your kids, your, you know, significant others, parents, you know, who go and have Alzheimer's. And, you know, they go through this suffering. You see people suffering. And you don't want people to make a fucking movie about it, right? I mean, you don't want to be memorialized. And that's what Mel Gibson in his twisted, bloodthirsty, fucking horrific inner world has done with Jesus, right? I mean, you know, I'm not a Christian now, but, you know, I have a relationship with Jesus, and, you know, I grew up as a Catholic, and, you know, I believe in Jesus' teaching and his life, you know, outside of the Christian religion. And just looking at him being tortured in this way, right? Or anybody, you know, somebody being crucified. And, you know, you don't need to see it, right? Because that's not the point. And, you know, again, it's not what people say it is or what the Christian religion tells you it is. It isn't a moment of glory. You know, it's a moment of human shame that a higher developed soul would come down and try to elevate people, and they would fucking kill him and torture him, and then they would take his teachings and twist them and use his teachings to create, like, the Crusades and all these wars and torture people and burn witches at the stake, and, you know, people who are practicing other forms of medicine, like women who were midwives and, you know, were herbalists, and because they wanted to, you know, they wanted to have a monopoly on allopathic medicine, would call them witches and torture them, and, you know, all the bullshit that's been done by the Christian religion that has been warped and twisted, and Jesus' name being thrown around as a reason for it all, right? And, you know, Mel Gibson putting this bloodthirsty fucking movie together, missing the whole point of it, right? It's painful that, you know, he didn't have good disciples. It's painful that his message wasn't received. But Jesus is one amongst many higher developed souls who've come down and has tried to work towards elevating the human condition. And human beings don't want any fucking part of it. And I can tell you, like, this is, I mean, it's very present for me. in my life now and my previous lives, I'm fully aware of this human dilemma, that we have a higher nature. We have a saint within us. We have a spiritual person. We have a potential spiritual master, right? We have a potential Christ, Jesus the Christ, inside us, a soul that we can manifest our higher nature, and we just refuse to fucking do it. And, that at some point is, there has to be like a, all right, it's now or fucking never moment, and that's coming. That's what all this shit that's about. The apocalypse isn't about the collapse of civilization. It's about whether human beings will choose to go embrace their higher nature. And right now, it doesn't look like we are. But there's always hope, right? Because there is potential. Not talking about Joe Biden's potential, but real potential. All of us have a saint within us. All of us has a soul. And we all have the choice to embrace that higher nature. So anyways, let's get into the other stuff. So just a few more things to cover here. This happened. Lindsey Graham.
Do you think we're at war? And if so, who with?
Oh, Senator, we're at war on so many fronts.
Are we at war with ISIS?
Of course we're at war with
ISIS is an American intelligence community asset, which I've explained before.
They're at war with us. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely, Senator.
Do you think since
Absolutely, Senator.
our withdrawal from Afghanistan, threats to our homeland have gone up from ISIS?
Yes.
Okay, March 7th, 2024, General Corella.
Okay, so like just silly stuff, right? Plus he's leading the witness. Who are we war? Oh, we're at war with so many people, so many things. We're at war everywhere. We're war. Let's just move on here. So I forgot about this guy, Skifty Skift. I went through this. At some point she said, I can't believe you are asking me such a question. Might be at the end here. I couldn't find it, but let's listen to the end. Because it's pretty much like this the whole time. Skifty's just impossible to listen to. I'm not going to show you much because he's just Skifty Skift.
Able to review
Listen,
hundreds
I'm
of
not going to
cases on the first
mislead
day?
this body nor you.
All right, let me ask another question. You don't want to answer that. Let me ask
You were
another question.
censured by
It will
Congress,
also-
Senator, for
it will
comments just
also-
like this that
it
are
will
so reckless.
It will also be important for you to be able to preserve the records, the evidence of the department. Are you ready to commit that none of the evidence in the January 6th investigation will be destroyed under your watch?
Senator, I will follow the law. I will consult with ethical officials in the
Do
department.
you see any ethical basis to destroy evidence in the January 6th investigation? Then why can't you answer the question? Why can't you say, I commit to this committee, we will never destroy the evidence in the January 6th investigation? Why can't you give this committee and the American people that assurance?
Are you frightened because evidence was destroyed against President Trump that was false? Is that why you're
Why do
frightened
you
now?
have
I can't
difficulty?
believe this is even.
Why do you have difficulty answering that question?
I can't believe
Why
you're
do you have
asking such a
difficulty?
question.
Why do you have difficulty promising to preserve evidence at the Department of Justice? Why is that a difficult question?
I will follow the law.
It shouldn't be a difficult question.
So that was part of the thing. One more annoyed person to get to here.
To answer that question, so let me get on to.
Would you like to?
I do have
I'd love to
questions for the second round.
You'll have a second round. Would you like to speak before I call on Senator Cruz?
No, sir. Thank you.
Okay. Senator Cruz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Bondi, welcome. Thank you for your long career in public service, and thank you for
your service. So Ted Cruz.
Hypothetical. It has happened over the last 4 years. And I think perhaps the most tragic legacy of the Biden-Harris administration has been the politicization and the weaponization of the United States Department of Justice.
So this was, the two realities, right? This is the two faulty realities, both of them bullshit, warring with each other. One more thing to get to. I don't want to talk. Ted Cruz is Ted Cruz. Let me show you this last piece about the Pete Hegseth hearing. All right, so this lemon-sucking Babylonian is witch. Actually, this is a witch-like person. If you were going to say anything, witch would be the,
Understand the import and the stakes of what happened on Capitol Hill today, and to understand how it shows us exactly how Donald Trump, in a second term as president, has given up on even pretending to want to govern. We begin with a moment from exactly 8 years ago. Here's a snippet from the confirmation hearing of Donald Trump's first defense secretary, General Jim Mattis.
Mad Dog Mattis. Remember, Trump turned on him. Why is it not going? Here we go. Is it frozen? Yeah.
I'll join my colleagues in thanking you for your service. You've spent your entire
Thank you for your service.
life in service to the country, keeping us safe. And we all know the most important function of federal government is to keep its citizens safe at all times. And you've done that with honor and with integrity. So thank you on behalf of a grateful nation.
If you end up in this job, our national security may well depend in part on your willingness to voice your opinions, even when others disagree, even when you are under pressure, to remain silent. We are counting on you.
I believe that your appreciation for the costs of war in blood, treasure, and lives, and the impact on veterans afterward, will enable you to be a check on rash and potentially ill-considered use of military force by a president-elect who perhaps lacks that same appreciation.
Okay, so first of all, she's trying to contrast how much they slathered all over this guy who Trump ended up, slamming. He didn't like this guy, right? Mad Dog Mattis, who turned on Trump later on. So, but this is what Trump said about this on Joe Rogan. That Trump didn't know what he was doing, that he didn't, he was in business, he'd never been in politics before, and that he couldn't put his own people in because there was no Trumpers in positions, who had training for these things, which there are now. There are Trumper senators or Trumper people in the military. I mean, there's Trumper people everywhere now, right? And again, I'm not saying Trump is good because Trump sucks, but her analysis here is leaving out a big piece of this, that Trump had to go in and pick people who are a part of the establishment. And these guys are all saying here that this guy is going to be war crazy because Trump sounded like he was going to be war crazy. He said he had no problem using nuclear weapons. He said, he was bragging about it. He wanted to have a North Korea's military-style parade for his inauguration, right? Like I believe, like so many other people believed, that Trump was going to be war happy. And it turned out to be the opposite, right? Which we can all acknowledge. If there's one good thing I can say about Trump, the number one thing I could say about Trump is he stopped the shitty wars. He didn't withdraw from Afghanistan, but he put a clamps on all those, the Syrian war. There's no war with Russia and the Ukraine. Trump did limited military action. He had a few little things he did. But for the most part, he stopped doing this bullshit. He stopped ordering ISIS to do things. He got rid of all those things. He wasn't a war president. In fact, he was the opposite of that. It was peaceful during his term, and he wasn't pushing this agenda. And that's one of the reasons that they attacked him, because they wanted him to do that. They wanted more war, right? The military-industrial complex, right? And so we can now all agree that Trump wasn't this crazy maniac, at least his first term. We don't know about this term. We don't know what his direction was. And that he had to put people in, which he admitted on Joe Rogan, that weren't his people. He had to put he had to put political insiders, Washington, D.C. insiders into these positions, because he said if he took people out of the private sector, that they hadn't been vetted yet. And so, and even if he had, these guys would have tried to get rid of him. He wouldn't have the same ability to pass that through, because the political establishment, because there were Republicans that were against Trump already, and then all the Democrats, right? And so this is disingenuous, right? It's not honest to what actually happened.
And so I think you will have a critical role as Secretary of Defense in providing a check on that kind of action.
So you're saying a guy named Mad Dog was going to be the voice of reason, right?
So all those comments made to Jim Mattis. Jim Mattis would go on to confirmed by the United States Senate 98-1. A celebrated and politically uncontroversial pick by any ideological standard.
See, what they didn't like about Trump, that he was an outsider. He wasn't going to play by their rules. And not that he was going to be good. Not that he was going to be Robin Hood. And not that he was going to, steal from the rich and give to the poor. He was just going to take away from their scams for his own scams, right? Like he was going to shut down their scams and then run his own scams. And all these political insiders didn't want any part of that.
Trump at the time was proud to stand with him and to have nominated him. He made the announcement to great fanfare at a rally in December 2016.
One of our great, great generals. We are going to appoint Mad Dog Mattis as our Secretary of Defense. Mad Dog.
Mad Dog.
He's great. He is great. I asked one of the generals, I love the generals,
I love him. Like, loved him back then.
and I won't use his name, but he probably would come forward. But I said to him, "You're a good general, aren't you?" "Yes, sir, I am." I said, "So how do you compare to General Mattis? How do you compare to Mad Dog?" "Sir, he's better than I am."
The caliber, the character, the reputation of General Jim Mattis mattered to Trump, and you heard the crowd roar. Important to know where we've been to understand where we are.
Where we are now, because Trump is appointing his own guys, right? Now, this witch, she used to be a Republican. She was one of the people in charge of John McCain's presidential bid, and she ended up having to be a handler for Sarah Palin. Very right-wing, very Republican. And they hired these ex-Republicans, her and Joe Scarborough. And, now they are so they're very liberal in their nature, and how easy they've sold out what they used to believe in, right? Because of Trump. Like, Trump has driven them, and not just Trump, because they have cushy jobs, which they get. I'm sure she gets over $1 million a year. Joe Scarborough gets $8 million a year. She's in the middle of the day. She probably gets 3 or 4. I can look it up later, but it doesn't really matter. She's a millionaire. She's getting paid millions of dollars to turn on her original political principles, because that's what all these people do. Not that Trump is good or great or better or a solution. He's none of those things, right? But he represents something that they can't stand, which is he's not willing to honor the criminal deals that these guys. He's a criminal, maybe a much worse criminal. I mean, he monetized the president in a way that we've never seen before, where his family's getting billions. I mean, there's some George Herbert Walker Bush, W's father. They stole $9 trillion or $1 billion or whatever it was, disappeared from the Pentagon's budget, $9 billion. All those things, right? And we don't know where that money went, but we know that Trump's family walked away with a $2-point-something billion deal from the Saudi Arabians. These other guys took governmental money. Trump did whatever he did. So they're all scams. They're all criminals. But he wasn't willing to honor their criminal past, their criminal scams, and their hierarchy and their ways, right? Their political ways. He wasn't willing to play the role that the president was supposed to play. He wasn't willing to act presidential. And for that, they lost their minds, right?
Vital context for what happened today at the confirmation hearing for a very different person, a man named Pete Hegseth, who went before the Senate Armed Services Committee today. Fox News Weekend host Pete Hegseth, to put it mildly, is no Jim Mattis.
He's no Mad Dog.
No, not even by Trump standards. If anything, the through line of Trump's picks to lead the Pentagon from General Jim Mattis.
Okay, so let's get to this thing here.
Well, no, fully investigated, and I was completely cleared. And I'm so grateful for the marriage I have to this amazing woman behind me.
You've admitted that you had sex at that hotel in October 2017. You said it was consensual.
Okay, so I showed you this in previous video, the cheating, which I'm glad he asked these questions because they're real. I covered this myself. he's willing to cheat on his wife, then why wouldn't he be willing to cheat on the government?
We'll stop here for a second. Now, here are the facts. Prosecutors declined to charge Pete Hegseth with rape after Monterey police investigated an accusation that he had raped a woman while at a conference in 2017. The fact pattern is not the same thing as what Pete Hegseth says there. Here's more from Senator Tim Kaine's questioning of him.
Okay, let's go back to what she says about it here, because I haven't seen that, but that's what's important. Is this all about the cheating here?
Co-workers to a strip club. You were drunk, you tried to dance with strippers, you had to be held off the stage, and one of your employees in that event filed a sexual harassment charge as a result of it. Now, I know you denied these things, but isn't that the kind of behavior that, if true, would be disqualifying for somebody to be Secretary of Defense?
Again, elections have consequences. Trump won this one. This isn't about the election, right? This is about the distance Donald Trump has traveled from General Jim Mattis to that guy whose smirk does all the talking. Now, Trump's nominee to be...
Okay, so the thing, let me just say this. Bill Clinton had sex with an 18-year-old girl, an intern, lied about it, and perjured himself, and then was embarrassed, and the whole thing with Hillary and all that stuff, right? And they have been the party of, I wouldn't want to say, because the Republicans have often, they have had all the weird stuff too. But there's all this weird sexual stuff. There's the Franklin scandal that involved the Bush administration and multiple people on both sides of the party that were using, Boys Town in Nebraska and shipping kids out there, all that stuff, right? Like that was something that was legitimized, not just, speculation or shit that's made up or exaggerated in the QB movement. There are things that actually are, substantiated, right? And we know these guys are depraved. And they get into him being an alcoholic, right? And this, the alcoholism and the womanizing. Now, these generals, they've been accused of worse. There's that woman who talked about the Cherry Marines, and these generals were having sex with men soldiers that would come in, right? There was a whole thing there. You can believe her or not. She's the ex-wife of a colonel, and they had these weird demonic sex things going on with the generals and these people, higher-ranking people. The generals are often not well respected by the military, the common soldier, and oftentimes they're just West Point political brats and people of substance who don't really, they've never really participated in the low levels of they go through basic training but in a different way and things like that, right? And they're elevated based in that, who they know, the families that come from, things like that, right? But in terms of all that, I'm sure General Mattis is a drinker. He drank a lot because he's Mad Dog. So you think that guy doesn't consume alcohol? You see those guys are big into alcohol. And there are a lot of drugs and alcohol available in war because they want to keep the soldiers messed up. They have that, there's the tradition of drinking in the military. And so to say Pete Hegseth is somehow different than those guys, yeah, he's a drunk, and he did some stupid shit on alcohol. And they're oftentimes womenizers. And so this is very consistent with, you hear General Mad Dog Mattis, you would think that he was probably a drunk and a womanizer, right? Just based on the name alone. And the Democrats have a long history of infidelity, and all of a sudden they care about that, right? I think didn't Skifty Skift have some kind of issue with sleeping with one of his interns or something? There's just all these scandals, right? There's all these, sexual scandals, and it's just a depraved place, Washington, D.C., on both sides. And, so this moralistic high ground where all of a sudden the Democrats are upset that this guy's a cheater. They should be, but they wouldn't be if he was a Democrat. They would say that's not consequential. Anyways, let's wrap this one up here. So I found a few articles. One that Mad Dog Mattis was very impressed by Indonesian soldiers drinking snake blood. But in terms of his alcohol consumption, he said, let's see if I have it here. I'm trying to find it where I searched for it here. It said here, Mattis to Trump, beer and cigarettes work better than waterboarding. And this is from the Duffel blog. We got drunk with Jim Mattis. Here's what he told us. And so they sat down, got drunk with Jim Mattis when he was made defense secretary. And so Dick Scuttlebutt is Duffel blog's roving Mattis correspondent. He has a degree in Mattisology, Mattisonomy, chaos theory from East Dickhole State University. Go Matticores. So somehow these people are obsessed with Mattis. And they have this thing called the Duffel blog. And they sat down and got drunk with him. So we know that he has an alcohol issue, or he's a drinker. You know, like they all are, right? And so, oh yeah, there's this thing I'm going to cover next time where this dude is put his hands on Obama's knee. I don't know if it's doctored, but it looks like it's pretty accurate. I'll cover that in my next video. But I just want to say one more thing about the whole Passion of Christ thing and Mel Gibson. And so, you know, people who are Christians would probably have, you know, people who are into the religion, most of them, would not be happy by the things I say, right? But I feel like I have a more accurate version. You know, we're never going to get the exact accurate version of Jesus' story, but at least on a spiritual level, and then, you know, knowing the things that the religion has done to distort Jesus' teachings, that I present a more accurate version of Jesus and his success and, you know, the greatness of his achievements and his story than other people who are Christian in nature. You know, I grew up Catholic, and I respect and have some sort of relationship with Jesus, but I'm not a Christian. And, you know, it's important to get the story right. Like, if you are living your life based in your relationship with Jesus is the centerpiece. I've accepted, you know, people saying they've accepted Lord and Jesus as their Lord and Savior. Jesus is my rock, and that's how I roll, right? These, you know that celebrity singer that's married to a Baldwin. You know, if that's the case, wouldn't you want the most accurate version of Jesus? Like, wouldn't you really just want to connect to him on a etheric level? Not have some church tell you what Jesus is about. Not have some, even if they're good pastors, they're not corrupt ones, they're not pedos, priests, or whatever, but they're actual, like, you know, they're good, solid Christians. You know, even them, because they're basing their understanding of Jesus through lies and distortions, distorted story, and it, you know, fucking matters, right? Like, this stuff matters. They don't even celebrate his birthday and his death day on the right days because they were trying to co-opt the pagans' holidays so that they could bring them in and convert them. And that's all power play moves. And when you get into lying and distorting the truth about somebody, and then being obsessed with his torture and his, I mean, if he was literally tortured like this way, the way they say he was crucified, and, you know, that may or may not be true because all these things are questioned now because they've, you know, distorted these things. But I think it, you know, probably happened at least to some degree. Why would you celebrate that? Why would you make that the most important thing about his life? Him being tortured and, you know, dying in that way? Because ultimately you're wanting that for yourself, right? You're either participating in the torture of him, which Mel Gibson is wallowing in, or you are going to be subjected to what Jesus experienced himself. You know, what he happened to him, you're saying, I want to happen to me, because you're following his lead, right? And if you're saying that that doesn't have to happen to me because he died so that I could sin and still go to heaven because that's the deal I've gotten from my church, that's a fucked up thing, right? Like, now you have a get out of hell free card because you've accepted Jesus, even, and you can still sin all that you want and be born a sinner because that's all you'll ever be and you never have to change, right? And it's one of these things people have to get over because we have to change, like, fucking now. Like, you know, like, people have to change now. Like, people are going to have to realize that they have to do wholesale changes. And if you don't do those things, you know, it's now or never. anyways, let me just wrap this one up here. But like, this is, these things are really important, and they're going to fall on deaf ears for most people. So I cut this whole section, the whole section about Passion of Christ, and put it in my Journey Series 135. And I added a voiceover at the end, which I think is important to include here. And so here it is. Okay, so some of the references in the audio were obviously about things that were in the video before that. They were talking about General Mad Dog Mattis compared to the current Defense Secretary, Pete Hegseth. And, they were trying to claim Pete Hegseth was an alcoholic and Mad Dog Mattis wasn't, right? Mad Dog Mattis didn't have any issues that this guy had. They all do. And in that video, I covered Joe Biden giving his last speech and him talking about America having promise. But the title of that video is Mel Gibson, Born Sinner, and More YouTube Bot, Price Gouging, Rent in L.A. Oh, that's not it. That's the video before that. JoJo Magoo, Farewell to JoJo Magoo, Mel Gibson's Passion of the Christ movie, and Dems Imploding. So that's the name of the video that I put up, and it won't be available. By the time this comes out, it'll already be up. So for me, the crucifixion represents failure of Jesus' disciples and followers, failure of the powers that be to embrace his message, failure of Jesus to keep it spiritual and not go down a path of trying to appease and to placate and pander to his people, all the things that happen in a spiritual organization, spiritual movement. And it's not a success story, and what happened to him was completely unnecessary. Mel Gibson believes that everything's part of a plan, which I should have stated in my voiceover for the video. And I believe everything's part of a plan, but that doesn't mean it's a good thing, right? Like whatever Jesus had to suffer, wherever he suffered, the crucifixion, whatever that was about, whatever was avoidable or could have been minimized or how bad it was, and all these things. It's important to know what's important in his story. What is the most important things? Like the kingdom of heaven within, I think, is one of his, if not most important teachings. It's the most important teaching to me that I know about, right? About his story. And the things about his story, the Immaculate Conception, some of these other things that they talk about are, they've emphasized these things to make Jesus into this superhero-like figure. And by changing the narrative and minimizing his humanness, right? Like a human being that every saint is also a human being. And then we all struggle with the same things, different issues, different problems, but we all struggle like human beings struggle, right? And seeing a human being struggle is really important because then you see that it's like he's not different than you. He's just taking a higher path. That, he's struggling with the same things. He's just doing a better job of it. And that's what spirituality is all about, right? I should put this in my next video as well. I've already rendered the video, but I'm gonna add this to it. So you guys watching the video will get this too. This is part of the Journey series. I was going to add to it. But, understanding that the person's human, but they also had to evolve, and they did evolve, and they could be successful, then you have some kind of a standard. But when you say Jesus is Son of God and you can never be like him, he's what they call an avatar in the Hindu tradition, somebody born into a certain level, and they didn't have to work for it, right? Jesus did have to work for it. Krishna didn't. But an avatar is limited because they don't evolve. A divine soul that comes onto planet Earth with a preset evolution doesn't have to go any further. And so they're not a good example in terms of, you wouldn't look up and say, I could be like Krishna, people who are Hindu, but you could say I could be like Jesus, right? And in the Sajmark tradition, all the masters of the system were people who evolved, and they had human problems, right? Babaji's, one of his children, two of his children died. He has two sons that died, and one of them was a suicide. He had another son his other sons were just not great people. They were, they were abusive and they were horrible people. They turned on and sued the Babaji's successor, Sharji, the third master of the system, And they were horrible people. Like, he had to deal with these horrible kids. Chargie's mom died when he was 5, and he had all these family tragedies. He suffered all these different types of issues. He had migraines. Babaji had an ulcer. The first master of the systemology had abscess of the liver. They had physical issues. They had, trauma, different kinds of, they all had their stories of human problems that they had to overcome. But it's not changing those problems. Like, if you want to take Jesus as an example, he had the ability to do miracles, but he didn't change his own problems. He didn't stop the crucifixion, whatever, whether he could or not, I don't know, but all of those things, right? Because a true spiritual example is somebody who has problems and endures those problems. There's no, it's not having a dream life and a problem without conflict. It's just the opposite. It's using that issues, using your troubles, your obstacles, your problems, and transforming them within yourself to opportunities for spiritual evolution, and using gratitude as your weapon of choice, right? Being grateful for these things, not about forcing your will and using spiritual powers, these cities I talked about at the beginning, to transform these things into something else. You're transforming yourself into something better by allowing these things to purify you and help you become what you need to become. Use the pain and suffering of what you are enduring as a human being to elevate you spiritually. And that's the true example, right? Which is something that Christian religion could have focused on. All the religions could focus on that. And some people, it is there for them. There's certain parts, sects, these different, sects, within the religion, like little groups within the religion that have spiritual aspect to them. Like, every religion has their mystics and their spiritual people, and they embrace the path themselves. They see that they can evolve and change, and they work to having a relationship with the divinity within them. But if the story is fucked up, like if they warp the story, they mess up the story, then that affects the whole nature of the person's life, right? The story of Jesus, or the story of any of these people, any of these saints, Buddha, Krishna, any of these Muhammad, the stories themselves, when they're manipulated, then it changes the teachings and the example that the person was. And then, they become materialistic organizations, which is the opposite of what they're supposed to be. And then they become a plague, a cancer on humanity, which is fairly, self-evident. So anyways, let me wrap this one up here. I think I've said all I wanted to say about it. But Mel Gibson is certainly a twisted individual. He's torturing himself and blaming himself, and there's self-hatred and this, this whole thing about being a sinner, and then all the bullshit stuff that he's done, and all these things. And then, telling this perverted story about Jesus where he's, imagining, and not just imagining, because this is something where he's actually acting out with great effort and special effects and acting and, all the things that he's doing to make this long, drawn-out movie about Jesus is being tortured. He's wallowing in Jesus' torturing and then blaming himself and, all the things that he does, which is, counterproductive. Only spirituality will save this world. It's Paul Romano, definitely pointing for the apocalypse and the ascension. Everyone have a blessed day and be grateful.